Howdy do, friends. Today I'm here to bring you another mix fix. Yes, another one. I certainly do love helping people. This one is for a guy named Jim Anderson, who he had some struggles with getting a song of his that he did a long time ago, so don't judge, to get the sound that he really wanted. And I completely understand. Also, you'll notice today I'm not in Reaper. I'm actually in Cakewalk, and it's going to be different. He sent me a Cakewalk bundle file, which thankfully I use Cakewalk, and I'm pretty well accustomed to using it, but I'm not as fluent as I am in Reaper, so forgive me today if you see me mess up a little bit more, and I may have to edit this video quite a bit more than I usually do. But yeah, here's his song. Fun little song. I liked it a lot, but you'll be able to tell immediately his original and my mix. I'm going to be alternating the mute between the two.
Sometimes I get to thinking about how much I want to give you. It was a world making all your dreams come true. Yeah, it would have made my dreams by making yours. Would have been enough for me.
So immediately you'll notice the spectral analyzer points out a lot of things that I'm sure you were also able to hear. Firstly, I didn't cut as much from each instrument as it sounds like he did, and aside from my master being louder, ordinarily I'd say let's gain match, but in this instance, I think it's good to be able to hear that I was able to get a certain degree of loudness without sacrificing clarity and honestly bringing out the potential of the song. So I didn't actually do a whole lot during the process of mixing this. I mostly just made some choices and stuck to them while also trying not to cut anything too much, because that was the thing I noticed about his mix, is aside from some really cool effects that I actually didn't emulate during mine, not only does it sound like there's a whole bunch of weird clipping going on, which is probably no fault of his own. I know that over the process of mixing something over and over again, you can really start to lose a grasp on what sounds clean and what sounds filthy. And unfortunately, clipping is a byproduct of weird gain staging that can occur, especially as somebody gets fatigued. The difference between that, which is sounding very clipped, very closed in, and mine,
so good. You reject the one who would have given all we could. I just wanted to love you.
The thing is, I heard the potential in this song. It's a great sounding song, it just needed help in the mix phase, which is really important. You can tell that he worked really hard on composition, and it really does shine through, even in the song with the less good mix, because that's the part of a song that makes it relatable, makes it interesting. So he kept it interesting, and I really like that. He had a lot of different parts that I actually let shine a lot more in my production of the song. So you'll hear a lot more guitar parts flying all over the place. You'll hear a lot more stuff going on, and that's because I really liked those elements, and they felt kind of buried in his mix.
I just wanted to
So without further ado, let's go into how I routed things. As you'll notice, there are a lot of tracks here, like 58 tracks, and actually, I don't blame you for having that many. especially when you had multiple different snare samples, you had multiple different things going on. Another thing that I want to point out before I start was I used Slate Trigger to replace the samples because the other samples were hurting me. Ordinarily, I'd say that's cheating, but I also happen to know that this guy in particular, I'm fairly certain, has Drumagog. I'm just assuming he has Drumagog because it says Drumagog kick here for this sample. That means that he can pretty easily, I think, get access to high quality samples. But as it is, I just want to, in full disclosure, say that I did change the sound of this kick, which was the most offensive to me, to this. Starting with the drums, I have the overheads, the hi-hat and ride, and the crash and the reverse crash all sent to the cymbals butt. I kept all of your panning the same, and I didn't change anything about the panning. So it's all the same way that you left it here. When it comes to the overheads, there's more overhead than there is crash or hi-hat and a little bit of ride, but it's mostly the overheads doing all the work so that it gets more of the kit sound. And then I have the cymbals sent to a drum sub. I have the kick with all the kicks sent to a kick sub sent to a drum sub. Snares sent to a snare bus to a drum bus. And then the toms sent to a tom bus, and the tom bus sent to the drum bus. So all the drums are routed to the drum bus in the end. When it comes to what I did to the cymbals, since I didn't do any processing on the individual cymbal channels, I did a lot of processing here in the Pro channel. So basically, if you hear that, these are the moves I made on the EQ for the overheads. Took a little bit out of 367 hertz. Took a bunch out of 3.3 kilohertz because was not digging it. The highs, I have a shelf at 11K, and I'm just boosting it by 1, and I'm high passing it up to 131. Really, not a lot of EQ on the overheads. Up next, I have this console emulation, just driving a little bit to increase the feel of it. And then I'm using the CA2A with a low enough peak reduction that it mostly stays at like 1 to 2 dB, typically, and then only really clamps down on some of the harder hits with a fast reset. So, overall, it's a really smooth compressor. That's all I'm doing for the cymbals, and then routing them into the drum bus. For the kicks, which I have routed to the kick bus, I have the same kind of thing going, but I replaced these samples with good samples. Hear how it already makes a huge difference? Choosing a kick sound, you can definitely hear it in the tone. You really don't need all that click in the clippy high end. So from there, with the kick, all I really did was shape it a little bit. I boosted some high end at around 9.2K. Boosted some 3.2K. Cut a little bit of 140 hertz because it was conflicting with the bass. All that thwunk made it stand out too much against the bass and created a weird resonance. And then I boosted a lot of 70 hertz because it needed the thunk in the low end. After that, I just do a little console emulation push into a compressor, doing no more than like 2 to 4 dB of gain reduction at a given time, with a fast release and a fast-ish attack. This compressor right here works a lot like a 1176, and that's kind of what it's based off of. And that's it. I didn't use this tube. I just EQ into compressor, and that was it. And then, just to round things off, I added a clipper to bring up the overall loudness of the kick and give it a little bit of crunch without making it totally saturated. So the snare kind of killed me a lot. I absolutely had to replace it. It doesn't matter what you replace it with as long as it sounds good. I used a trigger sample, but you hear the difference it automatically makes. It just sounds so much cleaner, so much warmer, and so much tighter. It doesn't sound like kind of white noisy. So from there, I EQ'd, just boosting the highs here at 10K, boosting some 6K, all with very wide bells curves, boosted some 1.9K, boosted some 1K, and it created this wonderful snare sound that I love, very lively. I also did a high pass up to like 141 hertz and a low pass at like 16K. Because you really don't need stuff above there. And I have the gloss enabled. I'm also pushing it through a tube. Just saturating it a little bit, bringing out that mid-range. And then into an 1176 again, super fast release. Slower attack this time, but around the same. And into a clipper again. Hear how it really brings out the air? Yes, don't abuse the clipper, but definitely make use of it if you have one. All right, up next we have the toms. The toms were very interesting. You had a tom attack, and then you had regular toms. The toms were super loud and super clipped sounding in the beginning, but I did my best. I focused mostly on the attack of them, since the attack was a lot quieter than the rest of that. So on the toms track, I have a very specific amount of EQ. Boosting the lows here. Boosting the mids here. Cutting a little bit of that garbage can sounding 4K here. And then boosting up at 10K so that that air really clicks. Low pass it at like 13K, high pass it at like 70 hertz. It's not a big deal. Not a ton of EQ going on there. And 1176 style compressor again. Nothing else really. These are here, but I'm not using them. That all into this clipper again, so that it really makes it smack a little bit, but just enough to provide that smack, and so that it doesn't stand out too much. All right, so now the big one. What did I do on the drums bus? Because the drums bus, this is kind of a thing for top-down mixers who appreciate it, but on the drums bus, I actually did nothing on the Pro channel. I did 3 things. First, Shep's Omni channel. Where I'm basically just boosting the high end with a shelf at 8K and boosting a little bit of mid-range at 1K. Then I have a slight 1K shelf down at 90 hertz. See, all just 1 dB increments. I'm also cutting a lot of 4K here, which was really what was bothering me in your mix, was a lot of that clacky sound from the drums. It really just cleans it up a lot. And a little bit of 300 hertz, where it's just a little bit of in places I didn't like. I'm also saturating it like 7.8% with even harmonics. Not a big deal. You can get the same thing with some tape saturation. And then I'm high passing it up to like 40 hertz. So overall, not a lot going on here. Just a little bit of multiband compression or de-essing and a little bit of EQ and one filter. After that, I use the API 2500 compressor because I love this thing on drums. Loud thrust, soft knee, 30 millisecond attack because you don't want to have too fast an attack on the drums or they'll get cut off. Very fast release, the fastest possible on this compressor, and only a 2-to-1 ratio because I don't want it to absolutely crush the drums. I just want it to provide air for the drums. Hear how it comes a little bit forward in the mix? That's all I want. And lastly, I have a limiter. You could use L1, you could use whatever you want. I used Finality, which has aggro and color buttons. So it's just kissing the needle to bring out that aggression. From there, you hear the room. I routed both your ambiance and gated verb tracks to this room verb bus, where I only did this. I boosted the extremes, cut some of the stuff in the middle that I didn't like. You hear how it kind of gains this silky feel, but gets rid of some of that boxier stuff in the middle. It becomes almost unreal, right? I then push it into this tube to drive it and increase the saturation. Pushing that into this console emulation to saturate it, and then compressing it with this compressor. 12-to-1 ratio, super fast attack, a little less than perfectly fast release. Lots of gain reduction, it's fine. Creates a really lively room sound. So listen to it without processing. With. Hear how it comes alive? Yeah, me too. I'm also sending the kick, snare, and toms to this parallel track. Basically, I'm emphasizing the 1.5K and the 11K of all the individual kit pieces. And then using that to drive it hard into this. Hear how it's creating that, really pushing everything super hard. Very fast attack, very fast release, super high ratio, absolutely crushed. That's going to help just fill it out a little bit with the drums. It helps it stick out a little bit over everything else when everything else is playing. Up next, I have the bass. I basically just grouped all of your bass tracks together, sent them to this single bass bus. Outputs of all of them are the bass bus. And did the following. Using the Pro channel as a post chain, I used Amplitude Ampeg, which you don't have to use, just use anything, really, and it'll fit the thing. I just like Amplitude bass because they have the SVT stuff. So right here, you see I have two different signal paths. One has no stomp boxes into an Ampeg with the following EQ choices and all that stuff. Into a cab that's mostly for low end. Into a rack with nothing. But in Parallel with that, I have a really fuzzy signal running into a clean guitar amp, running into a small cab for brightness. So what that means is you're getting a clickety-clackety bass chain and a very deep, wonderful bass chain with creamy low end. But it'll help it stand out overall. Hear that crunch? That helps it stand out in the mix when the guitars are playing. So I started with this console emulation here to give it a little bit more analog feel. Drove it into this EQ, super boosting the sub-lows, like below the kick, cutting a ton where the kick is at, which is like 65 hertz. Boosting in the 1.2K and 2.9K. It really brings the aggressive part of the tone out and also gives it some bottom end to fill things out a little more. I'm also high passing it at like 34 hertz and low passing it at like 5K. Because without that low pass, the highs would get a little bit wiry. It's running into a compressor with like 4 to 5 dB of gain reduction at any given time. Slower attack from the others, but still very fast attack and fast release. 4-to-1 ratio, it doesn't really matter. And then I have this maximizer, which is basically just a limiter. So you could use like L1 or whatever for that. After this, I have the clean guitars. All I did was bus all your clean guitars together, kept your panning, sent them to the clean guitars bus, and did this. I EQ'd them, and I compressed them. The EQ was just cutting a little bit of 2.5K, boosting some air at 7.7K, and high passing and low passing. Because I really loved these tones, dude. Not gonna lie, I am a big fan of that kind of guitar tone. I just needed to cut some of the wiriness to 2.5K so that it could blend with everything else a little better. But other than that, nice job with the tones. It sounds amazing. Alright, and then I have that running into a less aggressive compressor with like 30 millisecond attack and literally 0.1 second release. And makeup of none, 2-to-1 ratio, only ever doing like 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction at any given time. Clean guitars, nice job. It's these that were a concern of mine. So I bussed all your acoustics together and sent them to this track. They didn't sound that greatly recorded, they sound really clipped. So for the only time in this track, I did this. I used a declipper from Acon Digital to fix some of the clipping. You won't need to do this because you can just record without clipping by turning down the input gain when you record. But I had to because there was some really bad clipping in this song. Yeah, gain staging is everything. Just, you know, you can keep volume low when you record. It's fine. Now, you'll think to yourself, wow, that's a radical change. Yeah, this EQ is freaking radical. Look at this. Okay, high pass up to 100 hertz. Cut 6 dB at 200 hertz. Boosted 467 hertz by 10 dB. Cut 3.7K by like 3.9 dB. And then boosted 12K on a shelf at like 16 dB. Now it sounds a little bit more realistically acoustic. I'm very particular about acoustic sounds. So I also took all of your rhythm guitars, including this piano trick, sent them to the rhythm bus, where I have this EQ going on, boosting 237 hertz by like 5 dB-ish. That's kind of a Chris Lord-Alge kind of thing to do, I guess. And then boosting 1.3K by 3 dB, cutting a little bit of 3.4K by 2 dB, and boosting some of the air at 8K by like 2 dB. The tones themselves are good. I just wanted to shape it a little bit more to bring out the best parts of them. And for me, that was the wolf down here, the pipe down up here. I didn't like the aggression up here, and then the air above it. Helped control it a lot. Then, I liked a lot the tape emulator for the saturation. Hear that? Very saturated. I love tape saturation with guitars. That, running into a limiter. I like to limit my guitars so that they punch. And like I told you before, the leads were some of my favorite things in the song. I left them almost identical. This is how I did this. If you look, I actually did sort them out a little differently. So all these were the leads now. In dealing with the leads, I had a very specific thing in mind. I basically boosted some of the mid-range so that it competed with the rhythms, cut a lot of the aggressive buzzy stuff in the area, boosted a tiny bit of air, and cut a little bit of woof here. So this is mainly about taming them. After that, I ran them into CA2A to really cut down on some of the dynamics of them, make them a little bit more even across the board, and give it a good control. Hear how they just gel better now? Even though it's only like 1 dB of gain reduction at most given times. Yeah, sounds great. That was all it needed. EQ, compressor, for all of them. I didn't touch a single one individually. Alright, so now is the time for the big shebang. The vocals. I didn't change any of your panning for any of the vocals. So all that's exactly the same. I didn't change anything except dragging down this New York style compression one, which I didn't use almost any of. And I dragged everything down in volume because they were really loud, dude. Like, they were clipping. And I sent them all here to the lead bus. And then all these purple ones are the background vocal bus. So there's 2 vocal buses, vocals and background vocals. So let's see what I did, shall we? This is what they sound like without processing. With EQ.
Why do you show up in my dreams? Looking
8K shelf at 3 dB. 5.3 boost, 2 dB. 440 hertz, 3 dB increase. And a slight cut at 177 hertz by 2 dB. Hear how it just brings up the air and a little bit of that modern focus?
I just wanted to love.
It just makes it feel a little nicer. From there, I saw that you liked the CLA 76 on vocals.
I just wanted to love.
So I threw on a de-esser
I just wanted to love
to catch the S's.
you.
CLA 76 and like attack of 5-ish and a release of 7. 4-to-1 ratio
Just wanted to
in black. I'm never really doing more than like 5 to 10 dB of gain reduction. It doesn't really matter how much gain reduction you do on these, so long as the noise floor isn't that bad.
I just wanted to love.
And finally,
I just wanted
a
to
limiter,
love.
finality. Very similar to L1 or whatever. You can just limit a little bit to catch peaks and keep it consistent. That's all the vocals. Lastly, before we get to the effects, the background vocals. The background vocals, I literally just copied and pasted the chain, but I changed some EQ choices along the way. Same EQ choices on the background vocals, except this time, the shelf is at 12K with 3 dB. The mid boost is 1.9K with 2 dB. And this mid boost is at 1K, and the low cut is at 210 hertz. So it is slightly different. I just shifted it over so that it occupied a slightly different space than the mains, so they could blend.
I just wanted to love you.
Hear how it sits so nicely because they're right next to each other.
I just wanted to love
I have the same de-esser,
I just wanted to
same 1176 settings,
love you.
same finality settings. All right.
I just wanted to love.
So you'll notice that I have a send called real delay to this bus called real delay.
Why couldn't you just
This is what's being sent.
let me
This is the effect, a stereo effect. It's basically just quarter note delays with a low cut at 60 hertz and a high cut at like 5K and another high cut at like 7K. It's got a little bit of verb. It's your basic delay. I love this delay. It's got some saturation here, tape slew, all that good stuff. So from there, I put the Pro channel in post just for this EQ to cut out a little bit of the 568 hertz that was stepping on the vocals, cutting a little bit of the 1.4 kilohertz out where the background vocals were getting stepped on a little bit by this delay, and then boosting at around 9.2 kilohertz for one specific reason. I wanted the kick to have the same presence of air as these delays did. And that's going to sound strange, but it was like a basically middle of the mix decision where I thought to myself, yo, this could sound really cool if the kick hits, and when the vocals are doing their thing, the kick hits and it creates this feeling of like with everything else. So I figured I'd add the delay to the vocals that had that boost at like 9.2K in the same place that the kick did. So it's not stepping over it, but it creates a washy feel of like high-end dispersion. And that's just one of those things that I felt like would work, and it ended up working. It's a little detail, but a little detail nonetheless that I like. Feel how it kind of like envelops itself around the kick in the snare now in that weird way. Like everything is just kind of happening behind the drums and occasionally popping up after the drums hit. Yeah, it's like the kick slightly masks it and then it comes back and it creates this psychoacoustic feeling of, wow, everything is gelling and moving with each other. And I don't know why it worked so well, but it just did, honestly. And that's what matters the most. So lastly, I took all of your special effects and especially the intro delay and did this. These were the rendered effects you gave me. This is how I affected it. Cutting 3.8K to make it not step over everything else. Cutting 300 hertz to not be fat. And to really narrow the focus of this so that it kind of happens and doesn't take up way so much space in the mix.
Sometimes I get to thinking about how much I want to give you.
Without my processing.
Sometimes I get to thinking about how much I want to give you.
It kind of detracts from the vocal.
Sometimes I get to thinking about how much I want to give you.
So yeah, that was what I did for every individual part of the mix. Now is the fun part, the master. Master bus, I had no EQ or processing on in the Pro channel, but I did in the plugins. I'm going to go through this in order. First, I had the Chef's channel.
Sometimes I get from making all your dreams come true. Yeah, it would have made my
You'll notice a huge difference here, and that's because I gave it a little bit, like 2% even harmonic saturation, filtered it at 25 hertz, gave it a thump,
Making all your dreams come true.
which helped bring up the low end.
It would have made
I have R bass
by making yours.
doing a lot to bring up the low end.
Been enough.
Harmonics at like 70 hertz and above.
Would have been enough. 'Cause I just want it. I just want it. I just want it to love.
Where'd all the low end go? That's why I had R bass. Helped me feel the bass a lot more. So from there, I have the EQ with mid side. The sides at 12K have a shelf, a resonant shelf, going at 4 dB boost.
Dreams come.
The mid has a 15K boost of 4 dB.
Would have been enough.
1.7K on the sides is being boosted by 3.5 dB. 1.7 kilohertz is being boosted by 2 dB in the middle. 400 hertz is being boosted on the sides so that you can feel the guitar more by 4 dB. 500 hertz is being boosted in the mids so that the sides don't overtake it with the mid-range, but it's not a bump in 400 hertz exclusively. The low end is being boosted at 141 hertz by 2 dB. And the sides have a slight boost at 200 hertz. Without any of this, it emphasizes the parts of the mix that I like. So the de-essing is going on at 4.1K where this happens. Disgusting. And there's some de-essing at 2.5K where this happens. These were making the mix feel a little thin, so I had to de-ess them a little bit. So that's Shep's channel. Feel how it makes it more lively? I certainly do. Up next I have this API.
Making all your dreams come true. Yeah, enough.
Not much compression. 0 to 2 dB at any given time, really. But it just brings the whole thing forward a little bit, makes it feel like there's some more movement going on, and I like that. It's just the little things that add up. And lastly, I have the wall, which is, as you're going to see here, bringing up the overall loudness. You notice how this limiter, the wall, is showing you how much volume you're getting. And we got 6 dB of limiting out of this, bringing up the loudness a whole bunch without sacrificing too much. A lot of that is because we did a lot of compression and limiting in the mix, but we didn't really do that much compression on almost anything. So the real thing to keep in mind is that frequencies matter more than compression matters. Frequency is going to give you a spectrum of things that you can play with, mold, and shape to be the desired outcome. Don't be afraid to do some crazy things so long as you have confidence in them. One thing that I tell people all the time is seek and destroy means way more than this might sound cool. So when you're starting a mix, route everything, start on the buses, see how much you can do without touching the individual tracks. That's a major time waster. Don't go to each individual track that you routed to a bus and be like, I could do this to this. I could do this to this. Well, no, just start at the bus. If you've got good sounds going in, which is one of the issues you did need to work on, was that you didn't have a great sound going in for the kick or the snare, in my opinion. And those are really the only ones that need to be replaced. There's just something about how a mix can bring itself together. How you don't have to work too hard. You just got to be able to massage these pieces into the places you think they'll fit. So I'm going to do something a little different. If you look at each individual bus with all the master processing enabled stuff, you see how the drums take up this. They have this shape to them. What I expect from the guitars is to fill this shape. I expect the bass to fill this shape. Because in my head, I'm putting all this stuff together as part of a puzzle. So I want everything to fit in its own place. This is between the kick and the snare here, but then this lower subharmonic area is below the kick. The kick is right here. And you notice how it's never really touching this place. It's sticking mainly around here. When I'm EQing things, I'm just thinking about how I can make it fit with other things. It doesn't have to sound amazing in solo. Notice how the clean guitars don't take up a lot of this area, but they give more of that area. This 2K to 2.5K to 3K area is more accepted by the clean guitars. And there's not a lot of like 400 hertz to 1K. Well, that's because the rhythm guitars have all that area. And I can guarantee you the leads take up this little area right here. Yeah, right there. See how that works? I've notched out everything. The only real miracle work I did was on the acoustics, which they still don't sound amazing, but you can get acoustics to sound amazing. Cutting out all this stuff that the other guitars are occupying, boosting up here where there's not going to be any guitar, and cutting a lot of this stuff where the clean guitars are, where the lead guitars are, and boosting some stuff around here where the snare is going to be, and the snare's down the center. So there's not a lot of stuff along the sides that is going to be taking up this frequency. The snare and the bass are all mono. They're centered. So really just looking at everything as a piece of the puzzle. I love it when a mix comes together. I hope you learned something, and I hope I was helpful today. This is Phil Zio from One Wall Studio. Don't forget, leave comments, questions, suggestions. If you have a mix that you want me to walk through with you, don't be afraid to ask. I'm more than happy to help out and teach you something, hopefully. Thanks again, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.